On the simplest level, what the VCS, the Atari 2600, what that is, it's a combination of plastic and computer chips that enables you to play a video game, an interactive video game on your home television, which is something that never really happened before.
If you're making an arcade game, it begins as a hardware project. If you need something more in the hardware, just put it in the hardware and you can use it in your game. The Atari 2600, we didn't have that luxury. The game was already in Grandma's house. It was already hooked up to her TV. And all we could do is make a different cartridge, sell that to the person, he plugs it in.
It was the thing that made video games a worldwide phenomenon. And all it is it's a box that enables you to play an interactive game on your TV. But on a cultural level, that's such a huge thing to do, because there were two things that achieved that changed the world, literally changed the world. One is it put computers in homes. At a time where IBM only had about 10,000 PCs sold altogether, Atari had millions of units installed, and every one of those was a computer in the home. The other thing it did was it created an interactive medium with television, which was always a passive medium. Before video games, people were just zombies sitting on the couch watching TV. But video games turned people into zombies jumping up and down on the couch yelling at the TV. And that was a very different experience. And I think that was huge in terms of taking people from a passive state to an active state. And we're still learning the implications of that.
The entire reason that Atari created the Atari 2600 home console was to put their arcade hits into the home. If we can sell home versions of our arcade hit games into the home, we can sell millions of them instead of just take quarters from the thousands of people who go to arcades. And so the hardware was designed to make it possible to play Tank and Pong. That's about all that they did in the hardware.
So the distinction is this. CoinUp gets to use more expensive hardware. They get to use tons and tons of hardware, and they get to refresh their hardware all the time.
I had played an Outlaw-like game in the arcade. I think it was Midway. And I was just told to make a game, so I said, well, here's an idea, two guys shooting at each other. And so I made that game. My goal is to try to make it like the arcade game, so I could look at the arcade game and say, this is what it has to do. So there really wasn't any need for me to have communication with the arcade guys. I'm particularly proud of the Atari 2600 Canyon Bomber because it also has the Atari arcade game Depth Charge in it. So it turns out that in a 2KB Atari 2600 cartridge, I simulated both Canyon Bomber and Depth Charge, which were probably $3,000 arcade game hardware.
When I was young, when I was little, I remember there was this drugstore, and in their comic book rack, they had these abridged versions of great literature. You'd read it, and it was the whole story of Treasure Island. War and Peace, a comic book. But that whole notion of an abridged version, that is what was going to happen.
When I did Donkey Kong, I had, not surprisingly, absolutely no contact with Nintendo. Coleco was able to get me a machine. So I had a machine that I could play and look at, and I had already played the game. And like David said, with Canyon Bomber, the game is the spec. Frankly, the hardware is so different in its capabilities that I can't think of any value I would have had getting in touch with anybody at Nintendo. It's like talking to the guy who created the Porsche Carrera about making a bicycle. I mean, it's like, there's not a lot there. Not a lot you're going to tell me. Here's this masterpiece, and do it on this toaster, and I was young enough and stupid enough to not be intimidated. And I wasn't, because I was just a kid. And I was like, no big deal.
I'd have to say one of the more influential Atari games that hit me hard was Adventure.
Adventure had been a very popular game. Adventure is related to really a nerdy game. It's related to like text adventures or to Dungeons and Dragons more than any of the other things, any of the other intellectual property or content on the 2600.
So many games were just like kind of shooters and, you know, combat and whatnot, things like that were very simple. But Adventure really broke the mold for what the 2600 was capable of.
But one of the most, like, I feel like magical, impactful moments on me with the Atari games is that we got Adventure. And I saw the cover at the drugstore, because that's where we had to buy video games, at the drugstore behind the photo counter. And we got it home. I was so excited to play it. I just didn't read the instructions. I just ripped it out of the box and like played it and started playing it. And I was like, oh, and there's Dot, and there's like, you know, the duck chasing me, and I got an arrow, and I can't figure out what's happening. He ate me. Oh my God.
The weird thing about Adventure was the dragons were supposed to be dragons, but they just looked like ducks. I don't know what they were thinking there.
The bridge and the bat, and it's like, it was so baffling. I really loved that experience of somewhat confused experience. And I feel like that's actually something I love still in games now, when there's that moment of like, what the? Where you just get, games can do that. They can just surprise you, and they can make you feel really bewildered. And then as you slowly figure out how they work, that's part of the pleasure of them, I think, is that not knowing what to expect in them. So that moment of being surprised by Adventure has really stuck with me. Another thing I like about Adventure that I try to incorporate is that feeling that the game is really alive. The characters who are in that world live even when you're not looking at them on the screen. Like when the dragon or the bat flies on the screen in Adventure, you feel like it's been on a journey. It's been somewhere. Oh, the bat went over and it stole the shield. It stole the sword, and now it's in the rooms. Like, you don't feel like it was just spawned in that room. It's been in another room doing bat adventures.
And what it provided for me was a sense of mystery and exploration that would later influence the 2D adventure games that I would make that would help launch my career.
So one of the first questions they asked me at Atari was, what do you want to work on? So I just said to him, I said, what's the dirtiest, most basic elemental system that you have? And he goes, oh, well, that's the VCS. And I said, well, that's where I want to start.
I mean, the constraints on the programmers were worse than I ever even imagined were possible.
2600 doesn't draw a screen. It doesn't draw anything. What it does is it has these little logic devices, these counters and shift registers that say, this is the start of the screen, this is the left side of the screen. The electron beam is moving to the right. I'm going to count. I know how fast the electron beam is moving. I'm going to count until the electron beam is somewhere on the screen, and then I'm going to change the color on the screen for a little itsy bit.
There's only one console where you have to think about the electron gun moving across the screen and what machine cycle you're on and when you can show stuff on the screen. And that's such a fun and unique and annoying challenge that it really hooks you.
It's the most fun I've ever had making a game. What do you say, Dave?
Fun might not be the word. You know, it is the most challenging thing you could do. When we were doing it at Atari and at Activision, there were fewer than 100 people in the world who could do what we were doing. And that in itself was, you know, very positive, very uplifting. It's really a sense of accomplishment. If you can create something that, you know, 1 million people love on this horribly limited piece of hardware, you've created something. You know, have a sense of accomplishment.
And there are very few things more technical challenging than trying to get a game out of the VCS in the first place, because the VCS is a very technically limited machine. It sounds like a fabulous thing, and when it first came out, it was, because people had never seen anything like it.
I don't know if other people are as rewarded by it, but you're overcoming tremendous challenges. There's nothing that's easy to do on the 2600. And you're winning, right? I love winning.
And the other thing that's fun about playing them still is that they're all 60 frames a second. They have to hit that or the screen won't draw, you know? So they're all even much better than I think consoles that came out a few years afterwards. They all feel really fast when you play them. No Atari game has any sort of lag or anything because they had no option to have lag.
It's like when today, in hindsight, people criticize the first screen of Donkey Kong on the 2600. When I finished that screen, I thought it was a miracle. And you get people on Facebook today saying it's the biggest piece of junk I ever saw. And you just have to understand the perspective of where you were at the time.
The programmers that worked with that machine were magicians.
So I looked over this game. It was Star Castle. I played it a bunch. I thought about it on the VCS. I looked it over and I realized, holy crap, this is gonna suck. This is gonna absolutely suck. And I could not afford to have my first project suck. I did a little preparation, and then I marched myself into Dennis Cobal's office and I said, look, instead of doing this, I'd like to do this. This is something that I think uses some of the basic game ideas, but I think this is something that would work on the system. This other one won't work. And I just made this little presentation to him. And to his credit, he said, okay, you know what, go for it. The first thing I put up on the screen was an animated character. Most people use a block because they want to start working out their game mechanics and stuff like that. I put up an animation. That was the first thing I put up on a screen. And people would go by and they go, wow, that looks cool. What does it do? I'd be like, nothing. You know, that's what it does. There it is. I said, I'm still working on it. Don't worry. It's like, and then it got to the point where it was time to actually play it and have some of this stuff. So I had achieved my goal of trying to make something interesting. And it sucked as a game, and I was exactly caught in the place I didn't want to be. So what I did was I started taking feedback, which was extremely painful to hear people telling me how much my game sucked. The only thing that really made it tolerable was that I wasn't so self-deluded at that point that I didn't realize it sucked also. Until I worked out making some of the changes and getting it through, I was in very bad shape. And I was feeling some very negative feedback from some other people. And I was feeling, you know, I'm usually the person who's hardest on myself. And that was a tough time for me. And I had to get through that before I could hear what people were saying and start to work on it. And I had to release myself from, but I have to have this, but I have to have this. You know, as a therapist, I always catch people when they say I have to. I always love, people say, you know, I have to, but I have to do this. And I always stop and I say, look, you don't have to. Obviously you don't have to because you're not doing it, right? You don't have to, but you could, but there's probably a reason you're not. And the reason I'm able to give that lesson to my clients now is because I had to get over that. I had this have to that was making things not work. And until I could let that go, I couldn't make the game succeed. And when I did, it forced me to think in new ways, to think outside the box, and to go come up with some other left field solution. And when I made those changes, then suddenly yours was really good. One of the product managers came by who was responsible for this product, and he goes, hey, well, we're working on naming your game. And I said, can I make a submission? Can I submit a name? And he goes, sure, why not? I said, okay, I tell you what, come by here tomorrow morning. I said, you guys won't have it settled by tomorrow, will you? He goes, no. I said, come by tomorrow morning, I will have something for you. I will have a submission for you. So now I know what I'm doing for the rest of the evening. I don't know if you ever tried it before, when you just try to make up a new word, everything sounds stupid. At least it does for me. Everything, I can't come up with something that sounds cool. Everything sounds kind of dumb. So being the algorithmic thinker that I can be at times, I thought, well, if I can't just spontaneously come up with some name, I should come up with a way to derive the name. I'll come up with an algorithm. It's a simple title, what's going on? Maybe I need an action thing. You know, because it's an action game, I need an action word. I don't know the name of the character, but I thought, you know, revenge. Revenge is a great action word because everybody wants revenge, right? So I figure I'll go with revenge, and now all I need is whose revenge is it? Now I just need the name of the character. And then I thought, well, one of the great ciphers is, you know, writing something backwards. That's never a bad idea. You know, the head of the company's name is Ray Kazar. And Ray spelled backwards, that's Yar. And Yar sounds pretty cool. It's got a Y in it, so it's got like sci-fi, anything with Y's and Z's, you know, and maybe an X somewhere. That's good sci-fi stuff. And I sat down and I wrote a 10-page story called The Yarian Revenge of Razak IV. And that was that was going to be the title of the game, The Yarian Revenge of Razak IV. I stayed all night in the office. I was done like 3:30. I just laid down on the floor in my office and got a little sleep. And then around 10, in comes the marketing manager. And so I handed him the package. I go, here you go. This is the package for the story. I didn't realize it fully at the time, but what I had done was I had created the first backstory in the history of video games.
A fly. I'll have a mutant fly. Hello, Yar. You'll need some protection. Ion zone. Shift chroma. Intensify. Okay, now you'll need some weapons. You have a formidable enemy. The Kotile. Watch it, Yar. He has a lethal drone. And some other tricks up his sleeve. Spiral. Go. Good move, Yar. Now I have a surprise for you. A Zorlon cannon. Use it, Yar. Fire again. Got him. That's revenge. Yar's revenge. A video game. Yeah, this can be fun. This can be a lot of fun. Like asteroids. Get him. Do it. Beautiful. Watch it. Disintegrate. Now let's go into deeper space. Galactic map. Sector 11. Hyperspace. Sights in. Cylon warships, attack. Steady, stand by, photons. Star Raiders. That's it, Star Raiders. That'll keep them on their toes. Let's see what we can come up with next.
We're Atari. We have the vision, and we invented the technology to bring the excitement home to you.